situated around the room to answer your questions at the end of the evening. So give little tours and answer any questions you might have about the building after the lecture. I'm not going to embarrass her too much, just a little bit of embarrassment. I hope she can hear me. This evening, Amanda Moore, our new staff member, is here. She's at the very back of the room. Wave, Amanda. She doesn't actually start work until Monday, but she's joined us here this evening. She's been moving this week from Kansas City, so she's new to Asheville. So hopefully everyone will give her a big warm welcome, and I'll do a full embarrassing introduction at our next program, which is next month. Keep an eye out for the postcards and the emails. It'll be on the automotive history of Asheville. It'll be a good program. Now I would like to move on to welcoming our speaker, Dr. Jane Vann. Jane is a retired seminary professor who has a deep interest and love for Guastavino. That started when she overheard a group of friends talking about him and his work. As soon as she read Guastavino Vaulting, the Art of the Structural Tile, she was officially hooked. This program was originally scheduled for March of 2020, and as you can imagine, we had to cancel at the last minute. We are so thankful for Jane's patience and thrilled to welcome her as our speaker tonight.
So much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. And I see familiar faces and some of that original group of conversation partners. So it's wonderful to be here. I want to start by saying something I will forget later, which is I brought a little show and tell. And so I'll mention some things that you might be interested in, and if you want to hang around, we'll do a little show and tell. So the title of this presentation used to be Rafael Guastavino, the most important architect most people have never heard of. But there is a resurgence in interest in Guastavino's work, and so I've had to change the title. Rafael Guastavino, architect and builder of our most treasured public spaces. As you walked into the Basilica this evening, maybe you asked yourself some questions. Who built that? And how did they build it? Just look around. Look at that beautiful vaulted ceiling with no interior supports. How does that work? Or maybe you've been at the Biltmore and looked at the vaults at the entranceways and thought, who did that? And how did they do that? There are vaults surrounding the Winter Garden. Did you look up and wonder about it? Maybe you went to the Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., and you looked up at that beautiful dome and wondered who made it and how they made it. Maybe it was the Duke Memorial Chapel that caught your attention. Or maybe it was the Oyster Bar and the Whispering Gallery outside. Maybe it was at Carnegie Mellon, where you saw those magical stairways. For me, it was at Teachers College, Columbia University, the library, and also Union Seminary across the street. I walked under those arches and up and down those stairways and wondered, who did that? And how did they do it? Well, the answer to the question of who did it is the easy part. Rafael Guastavino Moreno and his son, Rafael Guastavino Exposito. Rafael Sr. was a Spanish engineer and architect and builder, both in Spain and in the United States during the late 19th and 20th centuries. Out of Guastavino's tile factory in Massachusetts, he and his son Raphael designed and oversaw more than 1,000 buildings in 41 states. His designs have made possible some of the most important and beautiful public spaces. Rafael Guastavino was born in Catalonia, Spain in 1842, and he trained at a school for master builders where there was a well-rounded curriculum in engineering, architectural design, and hands-on practical aspects of building. He was heavily influenced by centuries of tradition in Spain in what has been called Catalan vaulting. First known examples of Catalan tile vaulting are from the 12th century. Guastavino himself came from a long line of masons, and so he was privy to some of the inside tricks of that profession. His talent was recognized early. While he was still in his 20s, he designed and oversaw the building of a large factory in Barcelona that took up 4 city blocks. And also the La Masa Theater in Vilassar de Dalt in Spain. The dome is 56 feet across with a 10-inch rise from the edge to the crown. And the dome is 2 inches thick. Guastavino came to the United States in 1881, where his first major contract was the Boston Public Library. It's not known why, at the age of 40, Guastavino decided to come to America, but it may be significant that at the same time he and his 8-year-old son, Raphael Jr., and the nanny came to the United States, his wife and 3 other children went to South America. There's also an indication that he may have left behind some financial difficulties. He was described by his longtime business manager as, quote, brilliant, erratic, likable, excitable, creative, energetic, and careless about financial matters. Creativity and beauty and the integrity in building construction trumped finances every time. When he first came to the United States, he tried to find work as an architect, but because he did not have the academic credentials that were recognized in the architectural establishment in the United States, he did not win those contracts. And he didn't speak much English. He was hired by architects as a designer, an engineer, and a builder of domes and vaults. He would enter architectural competitions. Other architects would see his designs. He would lose the competitions, but those architects who won would invite him to include vaults and domes in their buildings.
We're not seeing the pictures.
Oh, I'm forgetting to click the clicker. Thanks for reminding me, Dave. The success of Guastavino's career in the United States was due to several important factors, some of them architectural and some of them historical. The United States, after the Civil War, was eager to establish itself as a nation among nations, and this meant the construction of important public buildings. The appeal of tile vaulting was that it could be built quickly and less expensively than some other methods. In addition, it was less expensive than steel and concrete. Traditional dome, oops, I went too far. Traditional dome and vault construction, used since the Roman times, requires the building of a support system below the arch or dome called centering. And you see it here. This is the Notre Dame restoration, but you can see the centering here on the buttresses and here on this arch. They're stabilizing those elements as they do the renovations and restorations. But with Catalan vaulting, you don't need that kind of centering. It's built with overlapping layers of tile and quick drying Portland cement, so that one day's work will support the next day's work. It's light, reducing and often eliminating the need for heavy-duty supports. So here you can see some workers building some vaults, and you can see that they're standing and sitting on the previous day's work. Also, you can see the strings and these forms, these thin wooden forms. That's not centering. That's a guide for the geometry of the vault. Here's Guastavino's own diagram of the difference between traditional vaulting and tile vaulting. And here you can see the Guastavino vault with several layers of tile. Here is the traditional vault with the required wooden centering underneath it. I know you're not close enough to see this, but you can also see these tiles are notched, so they're interlocking one against the next. All of these things make the vault exceedingly strong. So here's a photo of Guastavino himself standing on the incomplete vaults at the Boston Public Library. And notice again, there are forms in place here to keep the geometry correct, but they're not for structural support. And here's Guastavino. Oh, he's not in this photo, but these are those same vaults 4 days later. So they're very quick to build. This project, the Boston Public Library, was the most ambitious project. The lead architect, Charles McKim, coined the phrase, "palaces for the people," with the idea that anyone could come to the Boston Public Library and borrow a book and be in a beautiful building. Here are those same vaults today. But that's not all. Here are some of the other vaults that were built by Guastavino. McKim wanted a grand, eye-catching entrance, and Guastavino certainly delivered on that. Here are the reading rooms and the tea room. And here is the outdoor courtyard and portico. The Boston Public Library served as an outstanding example of Guastavino's work, and so it brought him more contracts. Another reason for the popularity of the Guastavino vaulting system was that it was fireproof. Throughout the late 19th century and early 20th century, cities were burning to the ground. In 1871, the fire in Chicago burned 19,000 buildings. In Boston in 1872, more than 8,000 buildings burned to the ground. The fires sparked a building boom, of course, and that lasted through the turn of the century and beyond. But during the nation's rebuilding surge, the Guastavino Company had 12 different offices with as many as 100 buildings being built at any one time. Before beginning construction of the Boston Public Library, heat tests and load tests were done to prove both the fireproof and the load-bearing qualities of the system. Here's a kiln built around a test vault where the fire burned for 3 days. And if you look closely, I don't know if you can see, but down here is an opening where the fuel was put into the chamber under the vault, and there's a work person here. Here are some photos of load tests. This shows about 100,000 pounds of lead put on the vault both before and after the heat test. No steel infrastructure or buttressing was required, yet the finished vaults, even with broad spans, will bear incredible loads, about 600 pounds per square foot. In fact, no Guastavino vault has ever failed. During the building of the Boston Public Library, a 2-ton stone fell and came right through a vault. But the hole you see is the shape of the stone itself. However, the next time you go to the Biltmore, go out to the outdoor loge and go to the farthest vault and look up. There's a little crack. But never fear, it's only a partial dome, it's right at the end. And these are decorative vaults, they're not load-bearing vaults. Thought you'd be glad to know that. It's a distinct advantage that such a thin vault can hold such great loads. Here's another view of the Museum of Natural History with the world's largest elephant. What's underneath that? What's holding that up? It is a large auditorium with a vaulted ceiling. And here is an unintentional cutaway that we can see how it works. This is the same photograph of the broken vault from the Boston Public Library. But I hope you can see the curvature of the vault, and yet the fill above it is flat. There's a difference between the edge here and this mass here that shows that the fill is leveling that vault so something can be built on top of it. Well, as I've said, there's currently a robust revival of interest in Guastavino's work. At the forefront is MIT professor John Oxendorf. He's made a study of Guastavino's methods and his work and received a MacArthur grant in order to support that work. So here is a picture of Oxendorf right outside the basilica, under the portico. And these are some of Oxendorf's students who have built a test dome and are sitting on top of it the very next day. Just so you know, John Oxendorf has promised that he'll buy a free lunch for anybody who finds a Guastavino building that he's not aware of. Not long ago, Bill and Rena I've got their name wrong, Henderson is not right, but they live in Black Mountain. Some of you know them. They made a trip to Berry College in Mount Berry, Virginia, and looked up and saw Guastavino vaulting. So they've been promised a lunch. I'm not sure what their plans are. Major scholarly resources are available for this resurgence of interest in Guastavino, largely because of the work of George Collins of Columbia University. Collins was an authority on Antonio Gaudi, another important, very important Spanish architect and builder. Collins began his research on Guastavino's work just as the Guastavino Company was going out of business. So he arranged for the Guastavino Company's archives to be brought to Columbia University, where they are available to scholars. Without his intervention, all of those plans would probably have been thrown away. The Guastavino Company was technically innovative and artistically creative in exploring the decorative potential for vaulting, the exposed vaulting tile, with pattern and color and design. Tiles could be plain or fancy, glazed or unglazed, in a wide variety of colors, and of course, they could be laid in a variety of patterns. Here are a few more. I couldn't resist. Guastavino's cheaper, lighter vaults of daring long spans made possible some of our most important public spaces. And this is an advertisement from the Guastavino Company that highlights some of those places. Here's my personal favorite. It's the Elephant House at the Bronx. And here's a series of other buildings that you may know or may want to go and visit. University of Virginia, the Rotunda. How about the Lady Chapel in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City? And here's a real outstanding bit of work. This is the New York City Municipal Building, and behind these columns is a subway station. Notice the Guastavino vaulting up above, called groin vaulting, with all the various vaults intersecting with one another. Imagine the skill, the technique, and the craftsmanship necessary to put together this infinitely complex geometric structure, all done without computers. And down below is the City Hall subway station, a subway station called an underground cathedral. It was closed for decades, but now, thanks to this revival of interest in Guastavino's work, there are tours, and you can go there. This was New York City's first subway station. People were afraid to travel underground. So Guastavino was hired to create a station that would attract riders and allay their fears. Guastavino built this spectacular underground cathedral, and there are now Guastavino tours, as I've said. This is a building, the next is a building I really love because it's so forward-looking. This is the Hearst Memorial Building at the University of California in Berkeley, built in 1906. And as I said, it's so forward-looking. Other Guastavino buildings include the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart in Richmond, Virginia, St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University. This is the chapel in which Collins was sitting when he began to wonder about who built that and how did they build that. And it led him to discover Guastavino's company and the saving of all those documents. This is the Queensboro Bridge Market. It's now a Trader Joe's. And here's the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. This is a remarkable achievement of the Guastavino Company. It was completed by Raphael Jr. after the death of Raphael Sr. The dome sat unfinished for many years, and there were plans just to put on a flat roof with steel and concrete. But while Guastavino was working on the vaults in the Undercroft, he proposed building the dome. He offered to complete the dome for less cost and in only 15 weeks. The newspaper headlines read something like this: "Disaster defied on Cathedral Dome. Young architect upsets all theories of engineering and erects a vast structure." New Yorkers gathered in crowds on the sidewalk to watch the workers up above. Here's a photo I just recently discovered. The arches that support the dome were built with centering, which you can see here. They're massive arches that support that dome. And so centering was used to build those, and then no centering was used on the dome itself. So the workers were sitting on the edge of an open dome as they built every day. The dome is 66 feet wide and only 4.5 inches thick at the crown. It was intended to be temporary, but it's been there for more than 100 years. So I think it's all right. And extensive preservation efforts are underway at the present moment. There's been a long article in the New York Times about it. The success of the Dome of St. Paul's and the subway station promoted the Guastavino Company under the direction of Guastavino Jr. to build increasingly sophisticated and decorative patterns in its vaulting. This is the Della Robbia room at the Vanderbilt Hotel. Here's the California building. It's now the Museum of Us in San Diego. This is Guastavino Jr.'s own home in Bayshore, New York, and it shows some outstanding tile work and design. This is the Western Union building in New York, where the arches are complemented by the vaults in the hallways, and it's been said this is the most outstanding example of Art Deco architecture anywhere. This long span vaulting made possible some of our most important railroad stations. Here's a sampling: New York, St. Paul, Chicago, Rochester, Toronto, and Buffalo. And if you Google Guastavino train stations, you'll find that there are a number that were abandoned and torn down. And here's one of them. This is the old Penn Station in New York City. You can see the Guastavino vaults all along here and in the main hall. It was torn down in the 1960s, and this photo at the bottom is a picture of that demolition. As a result of the demolition of Penn Station, a preservation initiative was undertaken, and it's still going on today. Part of the preservation you see around Asheville is a result of everyone's attention to these wonderful buildings that need to be preserved. And then, of course, there's the Registry Hall at Ellis Island. Imagine Guastavino, an immigrant himself, creating such a building to welcome newcomers to America. The Guastavino Company's most artistically ambitious project was the Nebraska State Capitol. The vaulting played an important part in the structure of the building, even though steel and concrete were increasingly favored by engineers and architects. But it's the tile mosaics that steal the show. It was built in collaboration with American muralist Hildreth Meyer. She sent the patterns and sketches for her designs to Guastavino, who matched the colors and textures up to her exact specifications. There are records that show they sent them back and forth until they got it just right. The project took 10 years to complete. And according to people who know, there are over 100 images of corn in the mosaics, appropriate for Nebraska. The building is an example of Guastavino's gradual transition from structural to decorative tile. The design and variety in the Nebraska building just go on and on. A trip to Nebraska is on my bucket list. Maybe it ought to be on yours too. The Guastavino Company held more than 25 patents, many of them by Guastavino Jr. when he was very young, just in his 20s. One of the patents was for Acoustolith sound-absorbing tile. It was used in Riverside Church, in Princeton University Chapel, and in Duke Memorial Chapel. But let's look a little closer to home. Let's look at, never mind. Here's the Biltmore. If you haven't been to the Biltmore, you should go. In 1894, Guastavino Sr. began collaborating with Richard Morris Hunt on the design and construction of the Biltmore House. In the process, Guastavino persuaded Hunt to add vaulted spaces where originally none had been planned. Hunt had planned vaults only in the entrances and in the outdoor loggia. But Guastavino proposed adding vaults around the winter garden, the vault over the swimming pool, and the main gate lodge. Today, a building like the Biltmore House would generate hundreds of drawings, maybe even thousands. Back then, there might only be a few dozen. So builders and craftsmen were left to use their creativity. Many architects with whom Guastavino worked would sketch out plans for their buildings and then just write, Guastavino here, in an open space. That left Guastavino to be his creative self. Like a lot of people, Guastavino decided he liked Asheville. He bought land in Black Mountain in 1894 and built an estate that included a large house, a small chapel, a gatehouse, a kiln for making tile, a wine cellar, a summer house on a pond, and a working farm on 1,000 acres. You'll notice that the house, called Rhododendron, is not built using Guastavino tile. Cash flow was always a problem for Guastavino, and labor costs had risen. Guastavino felt he could not afford those construction costs. There's some indication that, in fact, Rhododendron might have been thought of as a summer house, and Guastavino intended to build a permanent home elsewhere. After Guastavino's death, his wife Francesca continued to live there, but after her death, the home eventually fell into disrepair and was torn down. The property is now the home of the Disciples of Christ Mount Center, Retreat Center. Today, there's a walking trail with the important remains of the Guastavino estate clearly marked. This walking trail guide is available at the front desk at Price Mount, so I hope you'll make a plan to go there. There's also a highway marker on I-40 at exit 64. This is a good time to mention the Guastavino Alliance and some of the things that they're undertaking locally. They've worked with the Swannanoa Valley Museum to highlight Guastavino's work. It's the Guastavino Alliance that has initiated this walking trail and all the signs that help you locate those things. The Guastavino Alliance has a Facebook page and a newsletter and a website. So David Madden, I know you're here. Where are you? David Madden is over here, and talk to him. He'll tell you more. Guastavino's last project, Guastavino Sr.'s last project, was this very building in which we sit. There's a myth that Guastavino Sr. and his second wife came to Mass in the existing church and they couldn't find a seat. So Guastavino decided that he would build a new one, which he funded fully half of the construction. But Guastavino died in 1908, and this basilica was unfinished. So Guastavino Jr. finished the project. He was a worthy successor to his father, a brilliant architect in his own right, so it didn't occur to me until this afternoon that it was silly to show pictures of the very room in which you're sitting. But on we go. Here is the basilica. Guastavino enlisted the help of local architect Richard Sharp Smith, with whom he worked on the Biltmore estate, and these are some of the architectural drawings that exist. And here's a photo of the St. Lawrence Basilica under construction. We think this is Guastavino here on the roof. And this, we think, is Richard Sharp Smith standing on the street. The basilica is in the Spanish Baroque style, no surprise there, which features towers and columns, arches, and intricate surface decorations. St. Lawrence Basilica is an internationally significant and important building. It features the largest unsupported oval dome in the United States. It's one of the few buildings in which Guastavino himself was the lead architect. It was built from top to bottom using the vaulting system. Everything in this building is stone and brick and tile. The dome is 82 feet long by 54 feet wide, and it's 4 inches thick. Take your fingers and make 4 inches. Think about that. The ratio of the thickness to the length and depth, if you do the calculations, mean that it is, in effect, thinner than an eggshell. Here's the undercroft, and you can see the tile and brick and vaulted construction all the way through. Another reason St. Lawrence Basilica is important has to do with Guastavino's method of stairway construction. What we have here is a stairway in St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia, and these are at Carnegie Mellon University. They're amazing to look at, and even architects and engineers wonder how they work. Well, even though there are drawings and proof of load testing here, these are bags of lead on an unfinished stairway. They're not sure how they work. But here at St. Lawrence, one of the staircases in one of the towers, for some reason, was left unfinished. And so architects and engineers have a rare opportunity to see inside them and to understand more about their dynamics. Again, this is a silly thing to show you pictures of the room you're sitting in, but the interior of the basilica, I hope you'll take advantage of the docents who will be around and ask questions. This is a beautiful building with lavish tile work all around. There are murals and sculptures and stained glass, and all of it complements this elaborate Spanish Baroque style. The 2 side chapels are especially beautiful, so if you're not sitting in a place where you can see them, you should make it a point. You can see behind me the bas-relief sculptures all around the apse with the beautiful tile work surrounding, most of which was fired at the kiln in Black Mountain. As has been said, there is a restoration project underway here at the Basilica, and I hope you'll be generous with supporting that effort. As I've said, interest in Guastavino's work continues around the world. Guastavino maintained a connection with architects and engineers in Spain. In 1893, at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, he created a 3/4 scale model of a building in Spain, which is now an international heritage site, and I can't pronounce the name, sorry. But at the exposition, Guastavino met with Spanish architects who were there in Chicago. They went back to Spain enthusiastic about this tile vaulting method. So after they returned to Spain, an architect named Luis Montiel designed and built the Americ Amat and Llover wool factory in Terraza, Spain, which you see here. Today, it's Spain's equivalent of the Museum of Science and Industry. And our son and his family, our son who's an architect, just happened to be in Spain right now. And so I just couldn't help but throw in a picture of my beautiful grandmother. So let's look at what's here in North Carolina. You gotta plan your road trip. First of all, there's Centenary Methodist Church in Winston-Salem. There's Covenant Presbyterian Church in Charlotte. There's Chambers Memorial Building. Whoops, I skipped one. This is Davidson College. Yeah, the Chambers Memorial Building at Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina. There's the Perkins Memorial Library at Duke University. And of course, we've already talked about the Duke Memorial Chapel. This is the Jefferson Standard Life Insurance Building. Oops, these are out of order, I'm sorry. This is the, what? Yeah, there we go. Jefferson Standard Life Insurance Building in Greensboro. And now we'll go to the Basilica Shrine of St. Mary in Wilmington. And then, of course, the Moorhead-Patterson Memorial Tower at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Rafael Guastavino could never adequately explain how his vaults worked. It was an almost magical system. What engineering calculations account for the load-bearing strength and stability, given the thinness and lightness of these vaults? Modern computer programs are just now figuring it out. But in about the 1930s, building codes and tastes in architecture began to change. Exact engineering calculations were required by building codes, and the Guastavino Company could not comply with those requirements. The company was sold in the 1940s and closed its doors finally in 1962, just in time for George Collins to rescue the archive of plans and documents. There are multiple experiments and building projects now underway using the Guastavino method. This one is on the grounds of that very factory building in Barcelona. There are other buildings. This is a building in South Africa that has won international architecture awards. These structures use local materials, local soil mixed with a binding agent to make the bricks. They employ local workers. They have a very low carbon footprint, about 80% less than a traditional structure. And so, there's no reason why we shouldn't take up this method again. But no new Guastavino building has been built in the United States since the 1950s. There have been several attempts to undertake a project locally, and we would love to have a new structural tile building in western North Carolina. Just hasn't happened yet. We owe a great deal to Rafael Guastavino and his son, Raphael Jr. John Oxendorf says, these buildings demonstrate a time when there was a willingness to invest in magnificent public spaces. Truly, palaces for the people. And thankfully, there was a builder of creativity and genius and vision ready to meet that challenge. Thanks to them, we have some of our most important and iconic public spaces, even an underground cathedral. So maybe you have questions, and I probably don't have the answers, but there may be people in the room who do. Do you have questions? Yes.
I have heard in the past that the Bostonian historical, perhaps in ancient time, perhaps Bostonian Empire, they had part of the world.
The question is, how far back does the history of tile vaulting go? And the questioner wonders whether maybe back to Persia or other ancient civilizations. I think there are indications that that's true, but I don't think the detailed historical work has been done yet. And so I'm really hoping that this resurgence of interest in Guastavino and his work will inspire some historian, maybe one of you, to start working on that. Sounds like a good doctoral dissertation to me.
Would there be some buildings, vaults, constructed that by him or his company, would then be titled in that style?
Yes, I think there are some, and I can't call the names of them, but I think there are some. But the great majority of the work is Guastavino's own work. Well, thank you very much for your attention. This has been lots of fun.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk, Jane. We really appreciate it. And now I want to welcome Mary Everest, who we talked about earlier, is going to come and talk about the preservation work that's being done here at the Basilica and tell us a little bit more about their fundraising campaign. And again, I hope we'll all support that tonight. As you're leaving the building, there's the Lucite boxes. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget there'll be docents here after Mary's done talking. So stick around and learn more about the building.
Thank you very much. My name is Mary Everest, and I'm president of the Basilica Preservation Fund. We are a 501c3, an independent organization that was established in 2008 with the sole purpose of ensuring the future integrity of the art and architecture of the Basilica of St. Lawrence. We are thrilled that you are here tonight and to see all this wonderful turnout. I will say a couple of things. As people have mentioned the preservation campaign, in 2019, the Preservation Fund commissioned an historic structure report, which is an immense and wonderful 2-volume book set that gives us the full history of the Basilica and gives us a roadmap for what needs to be done to preserve the Basilica moving forward. The estimate for the work that needs to be done is $18 million. That is a huge number, but the church recently had initiated a campaign and we've raised $3 million, which should address the most important work, which is sealing the envelope. Guastavino buildings are somewhat famous for having some leakage, and any building that's 110 years old is going to need a facelift. And but we have an RFP out. We're going to have chosen a preservation architecture firm in May, And we hope this time next year that we'll have scaffolding up and repairs underway on the roof so that we can arrest the damage that's going on, and then we can restore and preserve the inside of the building. There are, as was mentioned, there are lucite boxes in the back of the church if you want to contribute to those to that campaign. There are also little brochures in some of the pews if you want to make a 5-year pledge. If you want to write me a big check today, I'll take that too. We'll take any money that you're willing to give us. We'll also have the gift shop open at the back of the church if you're interested. And we have some books that were recently redone about the basilica itself. Those will be for sale at the back of the church. But mostly I want to give you guys an opportunity to walk around. Please come up and see Guastafino's crypt. Walk into the side chapels. The docents will be happy to tell you about things, and we're so glad you're here. One last thing I'll say is when you have friends in town, we have visiting hours all the time. We have open hours with our staff by a docent, and you can come in and do a self-guided tour. Please, when you have people visiting, or if you just want to come by, come by. This is a building that should be seen and appreciated by so many people. And it just breaks my heart when I hear people from Asheville that say, oh, I've never been in that building. Come in, bring your friends, show it off. It is an amazing building. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Please walk around and enjoy it, and have a nice evening.